Hello, everybody. This is Salil Tripathi from the Institute of Human Rights and Business. And I'm here today with Agnes Callamard, who is a UN Special Rapporteur, who has recently produced a very important report on the execution of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist who was based in the United States, in Istanbul at the Saudi embassy. And that has obviously caused a lot of reverberations around the world. Agnes, your report largely focused on the extrajudicial execution of the nature, but one of the interesting and important features for our listeners is that you see a role for the corporate sector in this regard. So can you tell briefly about the importance of the case and also about what it means for the business world?
So the case was important for two reasons. One, because it is emblematic of a pattern of killings and act of violence against journalists, political dissidents, and human rights defenders around the world. And it's a pattern that is showing, unfortunately, an increase in the targeting of individuals such as journalists. It is also an important case because of the exceptional nature of the killing. It was a targeted extrajudicial execution which involved act of torture and forced disappearance and violation of international law, including of the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations and on the prohibition against extraterritorial use of force. So the killing of Mr. Khashoggi is, in my opinion, an international crime. So that's for its significance in a legal term. It is also significance in political term because up until now, the kingdom itself has refused to acknowledge its responsibilities as a state for the killing. The responsibilities has been placed on so-called rogue actors who are now facing trial, but the state, the kingdom itself, has not recognized that it is a state killings, and the high-level officials of the state have therefore not been worried or investigated thus far. So the political significance of my report is that I have brought into sharp light the state responsibilities and the very high likelihood that high-level officials within the state are responsible and therefore they should be investigated. So what about the private sector? Saudi Arabia is a very influential, powerful country because of its oil, because of the enormous amount of basically cash that it produces and that goes through it. It acts as a magnet for businesses around the world, whether, of course, oil, but more generally, all kind of companies, whether they deal with services, IT, communication, PR, anything. Anyone and everyone wants to have a business in Saudi Arabia. After the killing, a number of corporate actors did express their disgust with what had happened and took some timid steps, including by vocally denouncing what was happening.
And they didn't go to that event that was taking place in Saudi Arabia.
And that was an important milestone. There was a very important economic Davos of the Gulf was taking place shortly after the killing of Mr. Khashoggi, and a number of actors, economic actors, both public and private, refused to attend. So very good signal. That was October, November. Fast forward to January, we have Davos in Geneva. There is absolutely then no signs of sustainability on the steps being taken at the time of the Gulf Davos. So in Davos, Switzerland, public and private actors welcome Saudi Arabia back and are quite prepared to continue business as usual. I therefore decided to undertake my mission at that time, my inquiry, because I wanted to to do something as an independent expert for the United Nations. I thought the paralysis of the UN was something that could not be accepted. If we want to defend multilateralism, and we should, then we need to ensure it is relevant and meaningful, including in times of crisis such as that one. But corporate actors on their side have done very little following their initial action. So in the conclusion of my report, I do held accountable, and that means in a court of law. But in addition, there are also other forms of accountability that can be political, diplomatic, economic, financial, strategic. The corporate actors can play a role. The first thing they need to do, of course, is to abide by the UN guiding principle on
business
and human rights, exactly, which so far, as far as I can assess, is not being done. They should review their activities to see whether they are human rights compliant, and on that basis decide whether changes are required. There are a couple of corporate actors that I have singled out in my report. I have singled out corporate actors that are involved in the promotion of Saudi Arabia abroad.
Right.
So
these are public relations companies.
Exactly.
And
public relation companies and communication companies. My research has shown that Saudi Arabia has contracted out a large number of companies, in fact, most of them, in fact, for small or bigger contracts. So it means that almost every single international PR firm in the world has some kind of deal with Saudi Arabia. So that's the first thing. Second, when those companies are being contracted out to prepare and sell positive stories on Saudi Arabia, that's part of their business model, that's what they offer, okay. Now, I think that even at that level, they must be interrogating themselves as to whether the product they are producing and selling is being used to hide and to displace attention away from human rights violations. In particular, if the product is meant to displace attention on a human rights violation, they need to really be thinking whether that product is meeting ethical or human rights standard. Let me give you an example. Saudi Arabia is arresting women activists who wanted to drive. Contract out to company X and said, please produce a lot of product demonstrating how much we enjoy women driving. All right, that company does it, and I think it is, it's in its prerogative to do it. On the other hand, is that communication product being used by Saudi Arabia to displace attention away from the fact that women who have asked to have the right to drive are being imprisoned and tortured? Absolutely. What's the responsibility of the company? I don't know. But do they have an internal or external conversation as to whether they have responsibilities? And if so, what is the nature of their responsibilities? So
it shows a failure of due diligence, in a sense, isn't it? That's what you're highlighting.
Well, that's why I'm highlighting. And I don't want to suggest that they should not do business with Saudi Arabia, of course. And most PR firms at some level are selling products that are meant to transform a reality.
An image,
somehow.
yes, it's image management.
But how far do we go with that in an era of disinformation, in an era where dictators are using PR firms around the world to sell their images as benefactors, as good leaders? I think those companies really need to take a very hard look and develop a code of conduct, develop their red lines. I don't know what they are. I'm not putting them on the table.
Yes.
I'm just saying there must be red lines.
Right.
And they've got to do some work collectively. There should be a way for these firms to work first at the level of the firm and then at the level of the sector to really think through the red lines around the promotion of images that are really meant to disinform the public
And distort reality.
and distort reality. So I don't think they can hide away from that responsibility. I don't think we can put all the blame on Russian troll farms. They have a role to play in that context. It's a very tailored, it's a very proper, very well managed role, but it is part of the same environment where information is being twisted. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing I'm asking. And it's very clear in the case of Saudi Arabia that has become master at putting various products around the world that are meant to propose an image which actually, if it is the correct image, I don't have an issue with it. But, we have to be more aware of the reality.
But there is, if you look at the advertising profession,
Yes,
they have rules
exactly.
on
That's
false
it.
advertising.
That's
So I
it.
suppose it comes to that.
That's
you
exactly.
need codes of that kind.
Exactly. You need code of that kind at an international level and possibly ultimately a regulator or a place where people can file a
Because
complaint.
otherwise we are asking journalists to be truthful but not advertisers in a way. Yes.
And promoters and communicators
Yeah.
and PR firms and so on. All right. So the second companies I have highlighted are those that are involved in the surveillance
Surveillance and espionage, yes.
and espionage. And, I did think really very hard as to whether these companies in the current context can play a meaningful role, whether they could be made human rights compliant in the way they interact with the state of Saudi Arabia. I recognize that surveillance is used for very good purpose.
Yeah, legitimate purposes
legitimate,
on
that's the word I was
terrorism,
looking for.
and things like
Legitimate
that, yes.
purpose, okay? However, I've also, having read in details the work of my colleague David Kay on surveillance technology, having read through and discussed with him his argument, I eventually agreed with him that at least in the case of Saudi Arabia, there should be a moratorium on the export of surveillance technology. So that moratorium should be, of course, driven at the state level, but companies themselves should refrain at this stage to get involved into any kind of business. And if they do, because there is no moratorium, in the absence of the moratorium, then they should really be extremely careful of the use that is going to be made of their product, demand guarantees, monitor the implementation of the guarantees, and take swift actions if those guarantees are violated. There has been repeated allegations with credible evidence that Saudi Arabia has used, for instance, Pegasus to monitor and survey the work of its dissident abroad. In May, there was evidence of threats against Saudis and other dissidents emanating from the Saudi state. Those threats were driven by surveillance as well, or certainly involved surveillance. For all those reasons, I think companies that are selling surveillance technology to the Saudi state or Saudi companies, in my view, need to know that they could be held accountable at some stage for human rights violations.
This brings you the other broader question, the need for stricter export controls as well of technology.
Absolutely.
And which does become complicated because the biggest exporter now is China and not Sweden or the United States or Finland. So that takes us into another...
That is, of course, a different matter.
Yes, it's a different matter.
Look, at the moment we're also trying to defend our own democracy. And
I was just going to come to that actually, that we are expecting companies to do it right, and of course we should, but the companies are going to take their directions from their home governments. But the home governments are not doing enough to push Saudi Arabia. I mean, the President of the United States doesn't think much of what happened in the Khashoggi case.
No.
I mean, he wants to invite Prince Mohammed to his White House for breakfast and so on. Now, in that context, what more can companies do?
Well, I mean, in that context, companies need to do what everyone else needs to
Yes.
do. They need to stand up to the bullies.
Yes.
And even if they profit from the bullies, they need to question their own values as a corporate actor, the kind of society they want to promote, the kind of growth they want to be part of, the kind of sustainability they want to build. And in my opinion, none of those should be driven by the activities and the statement of somebody like Donald Trump, who is legitimizing and normalizing human rights violation, authoritarian behavior, arbitrary decision making, and basically the stepping on multilateral global effort. So I think corporate actors have a role to play there. They need to stand up. Some have done so. Usually they are the biggest one with a big backbone. They need to take care of the smaller one and encourage them, including through financial incentive, to also do the right thing.
Thank you for your leadership and a very courageous report. Thank you and all the best with your work.
Thank you very much, Salil. Thank you very much.